Never fly a consultant in again. That is the theme for my ACAMIS 2020 Technology Conference presentation on Virtualizing PD. Now, it's a pretty bold claim, and in the next 20 minutes, I'll be substantiating that claim with a variety of experience that I've learned over the last 3 to 6 months, not only as ACAMIS's contracted PD coordinator and leadership facilitator, but also as a Council of International Schools affiliated consultant, based on my experience with a number of the council's members that I've been working with, not only in leadership development, but also in governance facilitation. So I've been working with a number of teachers, middle leaders, senior leaders, and governors, and delivering what I feel to believe in the last month or so to be more effective sessions virtually than I had delivered face-to-face in the previous years. The reason for that being is I'm consciously planning much more effectively. I'm making every second of my engagement and interaction with my participants as impactful and valuable as possible. And I'm able to engage with them in a shorter time frame, largely because I'm requiring them to come into these sessions much more prepared than they normally would have been. Just an example of the types of work I do. I wrote a book, Hidden in Plain Sight, Realizing the Full Potential of Middle Leaders. Up to about COVID time, this would be a book that I would have for my participants in my middle leadership workshops to read. I could fly in, we could talk about it. We'd have book studies around it. But with the travel stopping and schools not being able to fly me in anymore, I had to find a way to still be able to deliver this content. So I virtualized it using a tool called Podia. And effectively, when I virtualized it, there wasn't really a need for schools to actually even work with me anymore. And I thought that was a great thing, because a lot of the content in this book is really about helping prepare middle leaders for their role. And it's something that they can do on their own. But more importantly, is I've provided protocols within my study guide through Podia, as well as a number of other types of self-guided sort of instructional videos, to help them understand how to have conversations with their peers and senior leaders in their school to prepare them for their role. This way, they're able to do it on their own time, and they're able to personalize and differentiate that learning based on the challenges that they foresee they're going to be experiencing in the coming school year. Now, that's just one example of how I virtualize PD. A tool that I want to share with you right now is a Mural Board. Not only did I have to learn how to virtualize content so that my participants would have a much easier way to process content before my meeting with them in an asynchronous fashion, but I had to make sure that the synchronous sessions were as lively and engaging as possible. It's not enough to be able to share a screen with a presentation, maybe go into some breakout rooms and have some discussions, because the groups I'm training could be anywhere between a board of 8 to 12 people, a middle leadership team of potentially 30 people, or if I was leading a class on interdisciplinary collaboration, I could potentially have 60 to 100 different educators in that session. I had to find a way to be able to engage and maintain that engagement throughout a 2 to 4 hour period. Mural is probably the most effective tool that I've found to do that with. Now, what you're looking at on my screen is effectively, this could be anywhere between 5 to 6 whiteboards, easily 12 flip charts. It comprises of probably 20 to 40 different slides. Now, this is all content that I've compressed into this mural. The mural itself is pretty big. Once I zoom in on the content, you'll get a pretty good idea about how big this mural is. Now, to get an idea about how we can navigate our mural, I've got an outline. So I can easily take you to the introduction. And this is the information that you'd get from me, or what you just did get from me about my family and my background, questions that we're going to be exploring in this particular workshop, maybe a little teaser or something to frame the content for the day about how successful managers develop. Now, this particular program is about coaching and mentoring. I had several different reference materials that I wanted them to have read and come prepared to discuss. And this was critical, because this mural board, what normally would have taken 8 hours for me to deliver over a course of a day, I was able to do in 2 2-hour sessions with a break, so 4 hours total, of contact time with them online. And that 4 hours, without question, was way more productive than if we were face to face. How could that possibly be? Because we were so focused on the content and in our discussions, and I kept them constantly engaged with that content throughout that time. We made effective use of every minute. Now, ways that we were able to do this and recreate things such as icebreakers. I had a great one here. If you could visit any place in time, what would it be? This is a great icebreaker because it's a great way to not only begin getting them to think creatively, kind of tap the different sides of their brains, but also introduce Mural to them, where I can introduce to them, hey, here's a great feature on Mural. If you could be anywhere in time, where would it be? So let's look at that prehistoric period, right? And as I type that in, it comes up with a database search. I can click on any one of these images. Maybe I'll click on it. It gets added, and I can add it to the board. And that's a place in time that I would want to be. People get introduced to Mural's features very quickly that way. Another kind of activity that I have with them in this particular course might have been on reflecting on an experience about what makes a great mentor. In this particular case, we have our first discussion activity where they have to fill in various Post-it notes. Doing a Post-it note, very easy. Double left click on it again, type it in. This is about mentoring. Now, with this, I can easily format my Post-its to have different colors, and each color could represent a different person. I can change the font size. I can change the type of font. I can easily move around my Post-it note. I also have other tools that I can use while I'm facilitating with them, such as being able to organize the various Post-it notes. So what we could do is we can group them into an area very easily. And then I can move that area around if I needed to. If I make mistakes, I can easily just go into Control Z and put things back to the way they normally were. I'm easily able to navigate the Mural board based on my outline from activity to activity. If anybody gets lost during that time, I can summon them and it will automatically bring the participants to that part of the board. I can effectively train people to use Mural within 3 to 5 minutes. And the type of people I'm training are, support staff, teachers, senior leaders, governors, people that come from all walks of life, whether they be housewives or house husbands or CEOs of businesses serving on a board. Within 3 to 5 minutes, we're engaging within this Mural board. I'm able to do consensus building activities with them by doing some votes. So if I wanted to start a voting session here on Project Aristotle, and Project Aristotle in this particular case was a study done by Google, where they wanted to really understand what an effective team leader was, and to do that, they had to define what a team was. And interestingly, when I like to do this type of consensus building and voting with participants, I really base it around this question of, what do you think your school expects of you? Do you expect to be, to lead a team or supervise a working group? Well, let's have a vote. I set up my voting session. I began voting. Now within this voting session, we can assign votes. I have 10 votes that I can assign in this particular case. So it's like being on a scale of 1 to 10. Where do you think you fall? Instead of voting for one or the other, you can actually weight your decision on the fact that, hey, you know what? I think my school expects me to lead a team based on what we're talking about with Project Aristotle. Well, let's end this voting session and see what all participants have said. So now I'm the only person in this session, obviously, but as you can imagine, all these votes get distributed and we have a pretty good idea about what the weighting is in terms of what the expectations are of the participants here. Now, the cool thing here about this particular type of voting is here with just a right click, I can export this area, I can download it as a CSV, and that consensus building activity we've just done, I can actually save and share later asynchronously. I can also basically save this whole Mural board as a PDF. Now, these are just some of the wonderful things you can do here, but throughout that 4-hour period, I have my audience constantly engaged. I've maintained that engagement. We're archiving all sorts of learning. and I'm able to share with them at the end what we've done. Mural is a phenomenal tool and one that I hope that you'll go out and look at. So this was a small teaser about what I've been doing in terms of virtualizing PD and the other facilitators that I've been hiring for ACAMIS to do the same. Now, when we think about what good PD is, now to recreate these experiences and condense them into a shorter time span, obviously doesn't mean that my job is becoming easier. Actually, it's quite harder. To virtualize great PD is going to take twice the amount of time that you would normally spend planning for face-to-face workshops. Now, this was a number that I learned by listening to a leading learning podcast from Diane Elkins, who was a guest on the show. She was the one that estimates that to do 1 hour of effective PD, 1 hour of seat time face-to-face with a student takes 40 hours of planning. Now that 40 hours comprises of all of your experience and training. It's not that you're sitting 4 hours to do that 1 hour. It comprises of your total amount of experience and time over your professional career. So it's a accumulation of that. But I could easily say to plan 1 hour of seat time for any of my workshops easily could take me 1 to 3 hours. So if I'm planning a full day, that's easily 2 to 3 days of planning. And I think any facilitator would mirror the same. Now, to do virtual PD, what Diane Elkin shared with us is that there was research that actually said that it takes 80 hours to do 1 hour of seat time. That's twice the amount of time. And I'll tell you why. Because we're doing more scripting. We're actually having to test and identify tools to create that same environment that we would have if we were face-to-face. Now, the upside is I'm not having to spend time going to an airport, fly, be away from my family. There's lots of time spent traveling that I don't have to do anymore. But that time easily gets filled with planning. So this is something you have to be very aware of when planning great PD. There's also great research that's starting to come out. And here's a study and a link I have for you to where you can find a study on what the effects of improving teaching and learning have been with virtual PD. And it is being demonstrated that, yes, there are demonstrated positive impacts by being able to deliver teacher training online. So we should actually start to do this more. International schools in particular should actually not fly in consultants anymore. We should spend more of that time having the consultants get to know us, break down the content over a period of time, as opposed to delivering it all at once, having more, iteration and scaffolding in terms of the program done over a longer period of time so that there can be more engagement in between the programs. Additionally, when we think about great virtual PD and being able to break up the amount of time that our facilitators are going to be spending with us, one of the reasons that my Mural activities are so successful is that I'm able to differentiate for the people that are really going to be attentive and in need of that content at that particular time. I can really kind of take out the window shoppers and the tour groups that are normally in our workshops, because when a school flies someone in like me, they want to get good return on investment. So they're going to put as many people into that workshop as possible, regardless if it's pertinent for that person at that particular time, or dependent on where they are in terms of understanding the content. I'm having to deliver across a greater group content that may or may not actually connect with them at that time as well. So in virtualizing PD, we're able to differentiate much more cost effectively as well. So keep this in mind that when you're planning your PD is change. We're not just bringing a bunch of people in to create awareness around something. We're hoping to take them from a current state to a future state based on what their current understanding and practices are, to changing those behaviors and practices for some type of future state that we believe is an improvement. Now, to achieve that, we have to accept that PD is only one small part of the journey, and it happens much later. There's so much other work that has to take place in the beginning, such as really identifying what our need is for the training, being able to understand what it will look like when we achieve that expected result, engaging and communicating with the various stakeholders much more regularly and effectively, basically educating them and making them aware of the need for the PD, spending more time understanding where people are in terms of their understanding of the content, and then differentiating the courses. Then we actually have the PD. When we do this, and this is just some content from my book, chapters 4 and 9, Hidden in Plain Sight, we have to be mindful of what really the school's overarching guiding principles are and the strategic plan is. How do the teams fit into this? And how do we align the goals from the training with that of what the teams need? Because that's where the buy-in really happens. The buy-in really happens in the classroom. It happens on the ground level. So we need to make sure that the PD we're bringing to them is aligned with the goals that they have, but furthermore, it aligns with what the guiding principles of the school are, as well as its strategic plan. Now, to do this, it's a process. Now, in my book, I kind of go through an example of what this process looks like to deliver effective PD. Here we have an outcome that talks about informing effectiveness of instruction. Now, effectiveness of instruction, to achieve that outcome actually comprises of multiple goals, or what I call outputs. To achieve those goals could take various forms of training. Some of those trainings, such as in terms of common planning, could be around training staff around unit planning, how to do schemes of work. Most importantly, though, before we even engage in that training, we need to make sure we have trust. That trust could be done through team building activities. When you are working in a virtual environment and you don't even have those inputs, you need to go back and start developing that trust and doing that team building and making sure you have a shared purpose towards what that outcome is. Now, a lot of that can be virtualized, but it needs to be broken down. It can't be all done at once, and it can't be assumed that that's what people want. So to have great PD, there's a lot of things you need to do in advance. And as you start to make those considerations and understand what needs to be done, you can iterate, you can scaffold, and you can have smaller virtual sessions that are specific to what that outcome is, so that you're having, PD as a journey, not all at once. This is what I really love about virtual PD. I'm no longer flying in, having a tour group that I'm presenting to where, hopefully I'm being able to impact the thinking and the practices of a few, whereas a lot of others, they might just be fairly, not as into that training at that particular time, or could be dismissive of it because they have other priorities. So effective virtual PD, here's 10 things that I want you to be really mindful of. Most importantly is that we need to be mindful of the assessment of individual and school needs when we're delivering that PD, and making sure the content matches both of those needs. So content has to be very specific to what the individual and the school needs, and the individual needs to accept and be bought into those school needs, just as much as the school needs to be bought into the individual's needs. That way, that content will be much more relative to what that person not only needs, but what they're going to be open-minded to in receiving. Another really important point is that when you do virtual PD, it still requires an appropriate learning environment. It cannot be in an open classroom where colleagues are walking in and out. It can't be in your office where people are also coming in and out, or you're getting phone calls. You need to find a quiet place to where you can learn and pay attention, as well as listen to what's going on. We can get much more easily distracted in a virtual environment, obviously. I can't pull you into a theater or a classroom and close that door and just pretend like the rest of the world is shut out. Because in a virtual environment, there's so many other things that can distract us, from our phone to email. Those things happen already in a face-to-face workshop, but in a virtual workshop, there's virtually no way of being able to stop it. So we need to make sure that we create an environment where that doesn't happen. What's great is we're so much more mindful of it that we can control it much more better. So these are just some tips for effective virtual PD. And now when virtualizing PD, I want to take this to this next level of understanding how to do it in terms of our internal environment. And I'm going to focus on DeFore's PLC's 4 questions. And I've added one there. Most importantly here, what do we want the target audience to know and be able to do? And here's the +1. Why? It's not enough to say they need to differentiate. You need to be much more explicit about why they need to differentiate. What are we seeing that actually requires differentiation in that classroom? What do we see that actually requires us to be able to inform the effectiveness of instruction? Or what don't we see? You need to justify it. You need to have that, what Michael Fullen calls moral purpose. That's the why for the training. If you're not able to explicitly define it, identify it, and make sure that your participants are bought into it, it doesn't matter if it's live or virtual, people are going to take from that class what they want, not what you want. So make sure that it's explicitly defined. And again, when we look at DeForest questions here, how will we respond when some, do not learn? And how do we respond to those that are learning and already proficient? This is the differentiation. Now we can group more effectively. And for those that need a little bit more time or instruction, instead of flying me in and paying all that cost, I can actually apportion part of my time for instructional coaching or other forms of coaching you wouldn't have been able to probably budget for or been able to have me stay as long for when it was appropriate. I can actually do that coaching now 2 or 3 weeks after. We can assess how are people using the content. These are very important considerations. Next, when we talk about differentiation and actually having effective virtual PD, we need to do more stakeholder mapping. Who are the champions for this topic that we want to provision? Because those are the people that are going to come into a virtual or a live environment and they're going to eat it up. It doesn't really matter. They're going to be happy provided that you appropriately plan. But now you have this other end of the spectrum, what we call the enemy. Now, they're going to be resistant no matter what. So how do we create a virtual learning environment for them that's going to be more effective? Well, firstly, we're probably not going to have them come into an online seminar. We'll probably have more asynchronous activities for them. And for those asynchronous activities, we're going to have ways of being able to assess what learnings they have from it. So we can build up their general awareness and knowledge of the topic. And as we do that and be able to identify ways that they can get further bought into it by perhaps seeing how our champions are applying the content, then we can introduce to them the synchronous sessions later. Therefore, you're definitely getting more bang for your buck because you're really focusing on the people that can demonstrate the wins for the practices that we're hoping to influence, so that they can influence people that are on different places within that stakeholder spectrum. Furthermore, we can identify the relationships between these various stakeholders and who can influence who. So again, planning for virtual PD has to get to that level of really understanding not only the needs of each individual, but who can influence those people so that when we do go into this virtual environment, that we make sure that we have the full attention and commitment of those that are there. And when you do, you can compress the learning time down greatly. You can increase the asynchronous time so that people can learn on their own time. So when you have a compressed and a really kind of, timetable that's just kind of filled up and all over the place, people can really take from it what they need when they need it. Then when they meet in that asynchronous time, it's really just about processing and tearing it apart and finding ways to apply it and then bring it into the working environment. That's the beauty of this type of learning. Now, the one last thing I want to share with you that I think is incredibly important about virtual PD is understanding that the trainer, myself or anyone else, is only 10% of the learning, 10% of the application. Now, this is a picture of a good friend of mine that we do a lot of programs together. This is a hike that we went on. Now, this hike had many different paths that we could go on. You talk about differentiation, we could go any way we wanted to on this particular mountain. And along this particular hike, we're meeting many different people and we're asking them, hey, where does this trail go? Or how long does it take to get from this point to, the next village? There's many people that we can learn from on this journey. What I want to impress upon you is the 70-20-10 model for effective development. Now, what the 70-20-10 model says is that 10% is formal learning, 20% is through networking, mentoring, and coaching. 70% of the learning is actually through doing. Now, doing isn't something you do in a workshop. Doing isn't something that we do in our virtual meetings. Doing is something that the individuals take away from the learning and then are able to demonstrate what they've learned, come back and share that with their peers or others, just to, get feedback and understand how they can improve upon it. Then they go back and continue to do it. So a common 70-20-10 model is, we're going to spend maybe our first few engagements in that 20% column, to where what we're really doing is meeting to understand what our needs are, trying to find out ways that we can fulfill those needs, maybe go into the 10% column, which is going to be education, take the information we need, jump back into that exposure column, which is the 20%, have conversations about how we can apply it, then go into the 70% and spend a significant amount of time trying to apply those skills. Jump back into the 20%, get some peer feedback, understand how we can moderate, jump back into the 70%, continue to apply so that we can hone that experience and those skills that we need, and then go back into the 20% just to validate it, maybe go into the 10% to learn something new, jump back into the 70%. That's what 70-20-10 is all about. How we're actually being able to mix up the learning environment in terms of the different mediums and our contact with others and the application. That is an incredibly important part about delivering effective virtual PD. The PD is only 10% of the learning. So therefore, if it's only 10%, why pay all this money to have consultants fly in? When what we really need to be doing is spending more time connecting participants to mentors, coaches, peers, really giving them time to go out and demonstrate that practice. It's not about the PD. The PD is important because that's where we can actually surface new ideas and share examples about what it looks like and provide other information. But where the time and the planning, the money really needs to be spent on is allocating time in the timetable for doing, allocating time in the timetable for people to meet. So, this is my sales pitch for you about why you should never have to pay for someone like me to fly into your school. What you need to do is just set up the opportunity for me to be able to engage with you in a virtual environment that is actually properly and appropriately built so that people are prepared for what they're going to be doing. They're not going to get distracted. We can make that time as valuable as possible. And, some of the things that I've learned in this process, I've captured in a blog post on my website, pdacademia.com, the 4 challenges with Microsoft Teams. My early foray into virtual learning, I thought Microsoft Teams was the answer to all my prayers, and it ended up being the worst nightmare. I share those learnings along with my good friends and co-facilitators, Kyle Wagner. In addition to that blog post, my friend Sandra Chow at Keystone Academy up in Beijing and her colleagues put together this wonderful image of all the different teaching tools that you can use in China. That these are not just for the classroom, these can also be used for teacher training. That said, if you have any questions or, you'd like to learn anything more about the work that I'm doing with ACAMIS and other council member schools, I'd be happy to share that experience with you. So please reach out to me. You'll be able to download these slides with this presentation, and, good luck this year. And I hope that you make every minute with your teachers and your colleagues as valuable as possible, because that's where the real learning happens, is when we're working together. And it doesn't necessarily need to be face-to-face. We can make the virtual time just as impactful and effective.